Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
We are now at Branson, Missouri. We're live with our Bible study. This is episode 217 of Line Upon Line, and we welcome everyone who's watching online, and we welcome everyone in our studio audience, which is wonderful. And we're going to talk about staying in Christ tonight. So if Dr. Ricks would like to lead us off with a joke or two.
We'll start
or
off.
Or five.
Well, we'll just do this one. Well, it depends how I get inspired here. Okay. At a big church meeting, there's a wealthy man, and he's being given honors and awards being presented to him. And he said that, you know, now that I'm a millionaire, I attribute all my riches to the blessings of God. And I remember the turning point in my faith. 30 years ago, I came to this church and I told God if he would bless me, I would give him everything. I only had $1 in my wallet, no money in the bank. I took out my $1 bill and I put it in the basket and I gave my life, you know, to God. And everybody applauded and said how wonderful that was. Oh, that is so wonderful. As he walked up to the front to get his award, the little old lady in the back leaned over and said to him, "I dare you to do it again." I dare you to do it again. Well, as we start off this evening, maybe since we're interacting with a live audience and we've got a wireless mic, we kind of feel like these are the kind of, I call it, I mean it in a relative sense, relatively quiet days. I realize it's not quiet, but I mean, there aren't any earth-shaking miracles. The two witnesses aren't here. The temple isn't in Jerusalem. And the church is not shaking the world to its foundation or anybody else. So during these quiet times, I think the battle is to hold on and grow, of course, us numerically and qualitatively grow, is to hold on. Because I think when the real excitement comes, and by the way, here's an odd thing that when you read church history, when persecution comes, what do you think happens to God's church? You want to say something, John? Flip the mic on. Tell me what you think.
I just think it goes stronger under persecution. Maybe smaller, but strong.
Yeah, actually, in many respects in the Bible, the church grew stronger, as you said, and sometimes even larger. In a way, you're going to say, that doesn't make any sense. You know, you look in the book of Acts when the Pharisees first, I think they killed one apostle, James, and they beat Peter and John. But the church got stronger, and they threatened them, "Don't you dare preach in the name of Jesus Christ." And of course, their famous statement is one that we all remember well. And they said, well, we have to obey God rather than man. And the church just boomed after that. So I'm flipping it over and saying, if I were Satan and I knew that, I would, at least in many places, I would try a different tactic during these quiet times. Now, obviously, when the two witnesses are here and maybe other things shaking up the world, then, of course, I think he'll do whatever God allows him to do. But during these quiet times, I think if I were Satan, I would try to distract, deceive, disillusion, and whatever that other word I used the other day. What do you think?
Well, I think it is kind of like what you were saying. You could also look at the converts. I know Dr. Ricks, I think several years ago, gave a sermon in which he mentioned that Israel never did very well with prosperity. You know, they tended to drift away from the truth. And so I guess the opposite of that would apply in the sense that when times got tough, people would have to really sit down and evaluate what they really believed, and that probably would make the church much stronger.
Any thoughts, Daryl, on prosperity and remaining strong? I think it's on.
It's on. It's on.
Yes, I think prosperity for sure. We know in the Bible there are many examples of people that were very wealthy. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, we can think of them. We can think of those that were not so fortunate financially in it, but still sometimes you find that certainly in life, wealth is not the answer, and staying close to God and in Bible study and prayer, and especially as times get more perilous as it is in our day, that we will be reminded of some of the warnings that God gave by not doing that.
I remember there's a statement in the Gospels where Christ said it's almost, he didn't say impossible, almost impossible for a wealthy man to be saved. We know there are exceptions, but it makes you wonder, why is it true that it's difficult for a wealthy person to be converted in this era and come to God? Because that seems to be what the Bible is saying, that wealth is like an impediment to conversion.
They have everything they need. If you're wealthy, you pretty much have everything you need. You know, the Bible says that money answers all matters. And if you have a lot of money, then while they say it doesn't buy happiness, it buys just about everything else.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it is kind of amazing. If you have a problem, you count on your money. And one thing that it's in the Proverbs too, that if you're a wealthy man, as you get older, people treat you nicer. I know at least one example. When you have a lot of money, or they think you have a lot of money, they're nicer to you than if they think you have nothing. And it's unfortunate, but it's true, right? So I know I've told this story before, but it's a lesson that is worth remembering. One of my teachers back at university, when I was young and had hair and handsome, he made the argument, but he did a good job on it. He said if the 1920s had roared to 1941, America might not have been able to win World War II. And he had a bunch of statistics like divorce statistics, family unity statistics, alcoholism, a bunch of statistics. During the 1920s, one of the most prosperous periods in American history. A lot of new things came on in a bigger way. Refrigeration, television was invented, though it didn't get big, but the soap opera radio networks, movies got big, air conditioning was invented, a whole lot of things came to
You can skip me for the minute. This thing just lost connectivity. So
okay, the machine is bumping us around here.
But you know, I know I've experienced, and most of you have too, where some of the happiest people that you're ever around are people that don't necessarily have any wealth. And where they do, they share and they help each other. I know, like my granddad, he lived up on a farm back in the day, and when somebody needed help, they were there for them, you know, whatever it was, and they were happy. And I can remember those days, those people sitting around the fireplace at night, and you know, of course, they had their cootie tobacco and were sitting around the fireplace with spit room, but everybody's laughing and sharing meals with one another. So good times, you know.
Yeah, I saw a thing on TV a few years ago about the times during the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl days. They went back and checked records, and and to try and determine how badly the depression affected people's health, especially in the area where the Dust Bowl hit so hard. And they expected to find that the rate at which people died would have increased, but it actually turned out to be the other way around. Their lifespan actually increased slightly, and they seem to be healthier during that time. So there is some correlation there.
Yeah, it's there are a lot of stats that show a lot of things, including going to prison, crime. I had an aunt who had a restaurant in that time period. They could sleep on their receipts on the weekends, just put them under a mattress. Believe it or not, at least in the parts where they didn't even lock their door at night. Now, if you owned a small business and you did that today, you'd be dead in no time. You know, if they knew you kept your, you have to get the armored car to come on Friday and pick up the cash. People knew that cash is there all weekend. Well, you know how things are. That's the difference. Not too far probably from where you were. My grandfather, they rented a farm. Now, they brag to us younger spoiled generation, as they put it. I don't think we were that spoiled, but maybe somewhat spoiled. They said during the Depression, they made a lot of their own food, gave some away to people in a nearby city, made their own ice cream, candy, and helped other people. And I mean, that's, if you have a lot, by the way, a higher percentage of people lived on farms than do now. And when you're living on a farm, you can find things like okra. And I know you all probably hate okra, but I'm looking at it from my grandmother's point of view. Okra grew so plentifully, you could fry it and whatever, all the stuff they did with it, and pickle watermelon rinds. You could do a lot with less. That's kind of what I'm saying. If we take that as an example, that if outside forces like the economy force people to be tough, but we live in a world, and I know some people are suffering financially, and I'm not making light of that, but most of us in this room are probably retired or close to retirement, but we have enough money to be fairly comfortable and eat well. Just look at us.
Very well, too well at times.
You know what I'm saying, don't you? So if that is true, then we'll have to manufacture the discipline ourselves from inside. Yes, Gary.
I have an example from the feast this year, just last night. Went to the local family-friendly restaurant bar around the corner. The gentleman sitting on my right side, he knew somebody in his family that was a millionaire. And he traveled all over the world and hardly ever home except maybe some weekends. And he told his kids once, well, you know, I loved you. I sent you to Harvard and everywhere. But they said, but Dad, you weren't there. And they had alcoholism in their family. They had suicides in their family, depression, drugs, you know, cancer, and on and on and on. So it's just another example of how money isn't the main thing. The main thing is for parents to be there for their children.
I was just telling my son about the grandkids. I said, tell them stories and talk to them, not just entertain them. You know how that to be the good dad, you give them fun acting, but talk to them and tell them stories and teach them things. And you know how it is. If as a parent, you thought, well, I could have done a better job, but I want to do an even better job on the grandkids. So I'm trying to get my son, and we do our part if we can. But self-discipline. I'm going to go to John 15:4. But what I want to say is, if we can, with the help of God's Spirit, of course, and God to motivate us, we have to apply the discipline ourselves. I think the world is going to take an attitude, relax, eat another piece of candy, right? I mean, more or less, in a figurative sense. And now's when we need to be strong. And then when tougher times come, we'll be close to God, and we can handle it even better. John 15:4 says, and this is, of course, Christ talking to the apostles, but by extension, he's talking to us too. Christ says in John 15:4, abide in me and I in you, as the branch cannot bear fruit of itself except it abide in the vine. No more can you except you abide in me. So our goal is to stay close to Christ during these quiet years when it'd be easy to get distracted and pulled away. And then in verse 10, if you keep my commandments, you shall abide in my love, even as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. And then verse 15, and this is maybe an interesting one to think about. Henceforth, I call you not servants. You realize Christ is God, so serving him wouldn't be inappropriate. For the servant knows not what his Lord doeth, but I call you friends or comrades, if you like that term better. Friends, for all things that I've heard of my Father, I've made known unto you. So we are in a position to be a friend of Christ. And that is our goal, to try to remain a friend of Christ. And we want to just talk about encouraging each other to do that in a world that's built to distract you.
You know, when I try to do this, but when things are good, the job's going good, you know, family relations are everything is going good. The car isn't breaking down. The heat is working at the house, and things are. I actually think to be more thankful and not forget that for the reason that things are going well. A lot of people mostly in the world, when things are going well, they forget all about Christ. I get a little worried when things are going really well. You know, I'm like, wait a minute, I better stop and, you know, recognize this, be thankful for this, and not get too not too sure of myself, and just kind of check yourself when things are running really well. You know, when your life seems to be sliding right along, it's real easy to forget. It's real easy to forget.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay, go ahead.
well, also, I always tell my kids that, you know, I've had to help my children out a time or two because they'll get in a little too much credit card debt or something like that. And I always tell them that, look, you get in trouble with money when times are good, because the money's flowing and you think you can afford a lot of things that normally you wouldn't buy, and maybe you run up more credit card debt, or you buy a little bit better car, and then, you know, we have these downturns in the economy, or maybe you lose a job or things like that, and all of a sudden you realize you're in a lot of trouble. And instead of just appreciating what you have and maybe putting some of that back for the tougher times that you know are going to come, that money's all gone then, and there's really nothing you can do to back out of that.
Father, do you know that when McDonald's started, and I don't remember how many years ago it was, but you could use your credit card at fast food, people bought 37% more junk food. And then I see people, not that it's against the law, but I see people using credit cards to buy groceries, to buy hamburgers.
You get the points. Got to have the points.
Oh, that's what I
You pay it off every month, you get points. That's free money.
Yeah. But you know what these stores are doing, don't you? They almost tell you, don't pay cash, use your credit card, spend more money, go into more debt.
Yep, that's absolutely right.
Yeah, I think too, sometimes we find ourselves in life, maybe we're not doing as well financially, and it can really get depressing for people that are facing financial problems. But for us as God's people, truly, we have to be content, and that's what God asks us to do. In whatever circumstance or situation we find ourselves, to be content. And if we are prosperous, then we've all heard too, if you've been in the church, remember Mr. Herbert Armstrong used to say, talk to us a lot about the give way and the get way. but really and truly to learn, if you do well and prosper, to be able to give and to experience the giving and helping somebody and seeing the joy that they have from it is so much better than being selfish and greedy. And
Do you want to make a comment?
Yes.
He's going to bring the mic over to Michael Burkert.
I think it's unfortunate that too many people, even in our church, forget to thank God for the little things. The water that we drink, the water that we bathe in, our homes, our clean beds that we get to sleep in at night. I mean, these are small things, but we tend to take things for granted and we forget to thank Him for that. And
Especially in this country, you know.
exactly.
Real quick, my daughter just told me today she's in a class called Asian Studies, and one of the people in the teachers in the class, one of the professors visited Russia, and just bathing in the water, just using the water to take a shower, was getting all kinds of like hives and things on just from using their water. We don't have that kind of issue in this country, but just going to overseas and experiencing what they have, you make you real thankful real quick what we have over here.
The first time I went to Africa was a number of years ago, and I was in a marketplace. There was a man that had some wood carvings that he was selling, and he said, "Would you like to buy this?" I said, "No, thank you. I'm not really interested in that." He said, "Oh, you could buy this. You're a rich man." I said, "I'm not a rich man. I'm a soldier." He said, "Well, let me ask you this." He said, "Do you have a place to sleep tonight?" I said, "Yes." "Will you have a supper meal tonight?" I said, "Yes, I'll have a supper meal tonight." "Then you're a rich man."
Everything is relative.
Yeah. I remember being in the Philippines and in the Army. It was in my uniform, so the guy knew who I was. And I don't remember all the money details, but he said, "You're an American, Lieutenant. You can afford to pay a certain amount for things that locals probably pay less for, and we don't realize it." But also, here's another example. We were in Jamaica, you know, a fairly nice country. Everybody likes Jamaica. My whole family was there. People followed us around, especially my one younger, more generous son. We'd buy their carvings and stuff because they needed it. They needed the money. I know you probably don't think of it that way, but literally, if you're an American, they follow you around. And one more thing that surprised me, you might expect it in some countries, you know, like the Philippines, you know, bad water. We were in Europe. The restrooms, at least in some places, varied, with just a hole in the ground. But also the water, I'm generalizing from a number of countries in Europe. The water is kind of brownish, hazy when you drink it. They don't offer you water unless you ask for it at a restaurant. The air is, I know they signed all those Kyoto treaties, but their air is not as good as ours. It is choky, smoky. The food portions are smaller. Well, I guess that's probably a good thing for me, but I'm telling you, even in Europe, they don't have the stuff that we have. It's amazing. I mean, France, Germany, Britain, Austria. I mean, a lot of countries. I can't remember a few others we were in, but I say in general, except maybe the real ritzy hotels, it is really not that good.
yeah, I remember my trips to India, Mumbai, India, and I'm telling you, I've heard about poverty and watched documentaries, read, but once my plane landed or where our plane landed, and I looked, and I remember my first thoughts was, I'm in a third world country. And when I got off that plane and I started to see what, it was hard for me to comprehend really what I was seeing. And I saw things where people had absolutely nothing but maybe the concrete to lay down on at night. I'm lucky to have a cardboard, and I'm saying a lady with children, and that's all they had. And I've seen them living in pipes, big pipes, living under bridges. So over here, we just don't really know how to appreciate these God-sent blessings, this birthright that we had promises that God gave Abraham that we're enjoying. until you see something like that. I know you probably heard some of you heard me say it, but I'll never forget the first trip. I made 4 trips over there. And the first trip when I came back, I really, truly wanted to get down and kiss the ground. That's how grateful I was for the things that we enjoy here. And I saw the contrast.
Most places I've been, it's crowded. There's too many people and not enough space. You don't see big yards. You do not see backyards and big yards and front yards. Everybody's crowded together. And you ride subways in big city, people are begging you for money. Me. You wouldn't expect it, but that's, if they find out you're an American, that's what they'll do. Sometimes they'll try to rob you too. That's another story.
Well, I really think that the gratefulness probably is one of the keys that we have, no matter what it is, whether it's the conveniences that we're talking about or the teachings that we understand, because we are a small, unique group that have this truth revealed to us. I know if you've ever read any of the books like Think and Grow Rich or The Power of Positive Thinking, The Richest Man in Babylon, those are all positive thinking books, and they extol the virtues of that. And one of the things that they mention over and over again is you have to be grateful. If you want that system to work for you, you have to be grateful. Otherwise, and they believe it's a system, and maybe it does work. I don't know. I've never really gotten into it. However, I did read a story several years ago about a man who was an attorney, and his practice was failing. People were not paying their bills. He didn't have much. He didn't have a lot of clients, and he remembered his grandfather once. I can't remember exactly how it went. I think his grandfather gave him a silver dollar or a quarter or something like that, and he thanked his grandfather for it. He said, "Well, you did the right thing." He said, "Now, when you get home, if you'll write me a note thanking me for this, I'll give you another one." And he said, "Well, I just totally forgot about it." And he said, "When my business was failing, I thought about that." And he said, "I started writing notes to my clients and my customers, thanking them for the business that they had given him, the trust they placed in him." And he said almost immediately his business started to flourish, and he eventually ended up on the Supreme Court of the state of California. So it was really a dramatic turnaround, and the only thing he said I did, in fact, he published a book with all of the thank you notes that he'd ever written. And he said, the only thing I ever did was show people that I was grateful. And so it's apparently is a law. So anyway, it impressed me.
I might read the scripture. This is Ephesians 5, and we'll pick it up in Ephesians 5:14. Just kind of expound it a little bit. We have to apply, as I say, the discipline we have to apply ourselves, because this world will put us to sleep. Because for most of us, except for maybe health, life is easy, right? Too much food. Now we got too much time. Now many of us are retired, but anyway. Wherefore, he saith, awake you that sleep, and arise from the dead, and Christ shall give you light. The light that we get is the understanding. Aren't we lucky to see the world in a much more accurate way than most people do? And that truth is a blessing to be thankful for. Verse 15, see then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. So I want to discuss with you all, how can we use our days and nights, our time more wisely? Because that's really what he's saying. Use our time more wisely than we have been.
Well, I think one way to do that is to keep studying. So when we are confronted, when someone on the street confronts us, or we're presented with someone who may be called, we have the answer. We can help them, also helping us to stay stronger in Christ, help bring them into, or at least give them the knowledge and the pretty much put them on notice, here is the truth. And if we can't do that accurately, if we can't do that convincingly, then it's going to be harder for them to listen and understand and believe what we say. A few years ago on atonement, here comes the Jehovah's Witness. Not a good day to hit me up at 3 in the afternoon when I haven't had anything to eat and to drink for quite a while. And I said, do you know what today is? I think it was Saturday at the time. He goes, yeah, it's Saturday. I said, no. You know what day it is? He said, no, I have no idea. It's the Day of Atonement. And he's back to the Old Testament. So I proceeded to grab his Bible, start walking him through some stuff. And he was okay with it, but his wife wasn't. And she was getting upset with me when I was showing him John and trying to explain who Christ was and going back. And she got upset. And I could say, I could see it. I said, you know what? You're clearly getting upset. You know what? Why don't you just, go on and find someone else? And they did, but I didn't see him kick any dirt off, but I wasn't paying that attention. But in order, we need to be able to do that when we are confronted, or at least get a start on them. And I think by continuing to study and continuing to be someone who they can look to as an authority on the subject helps us, and it also helps them when they do confront us.
Someone have a hand up? Gary's got his hand up.
Getting back to the physical blessings, in Romans 8 it says, the physical can be enmity against God, because his purpose is for his nature to be growing within us, his being be growing within us, to where we're one like he and the Father are, and we can be resurrected and born as sons of God. So I think sometimes these physical blessings could be a curse. It can crowd out the spiritual. And some of these people have all this wealth and physical things, and they're running around here doing this and doing that, seeking more and more wealth. They forget about the spiritual. And our whole purpose in our life is the spiritual, to become spirit beings like God the Father and Jesus Christ are. Getting back to John 15, verse 4, abide in you. He is in us. He should be growing. His nature should be growing. We don't have the power ourselves to do it. But his nature is growing within us to become more and more like him, and we will be born and changed to the spirit beings like he is.
There's a proverb that says there's never enough. It's around 12, 13, and 14, but that you never get satiated. And if you've noticed, if you get carried away with things, a guy's got 20 cars. I'm not making it up. Now he's got money, so I'm not saying he can't afford it. And he got a car dealer's license. In the last 25, 30 years, he's collected 20 cars. But he's not happy. I don't want to get into that. His mental state kind of goes up and down. But have you noticed in this world where a lot of prosperous people are, the greatest danger to teenagers is suicide? And we're talking middle-class teenagers, not the poorest. I mean, middle-class teenagers, the greatest threat is suicide. Does that make any sense? They've got too much, and they're still not happy.
They're spiritually empty. They become spiritually empty when all they seek is physical stuff.
Yeah. And no matter how, sure, it'd be nice to have some of these things out, but you can hear of people in beautiful mansions still committing suicide. You can have closets full of clothes and still be unhappy. And all the other things that you think you need the most, they eventually, they kind of you get tired of them, right? They no longer make you happy. So we have to find our happiness, as Gary was saying, in God. I think man was built to want God, to want to get to know God. And we have to take this opportunity and use it.
Well, one thing I'd like to point out about John 15 and verse 4, it says, as the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. When you think about it, what is it that a branch does in a grapevine? It merely is just a conduit out there to where the fruit is formed. And if it's separated from the vine, then it has no purpose. And that's the same way with us, I believe, in the things that we do. You know, it's like I've always said, it's not what you believe, it's not what you think, it's not what you say, it's what you do that really counts with God. And if we are allowing Him to work through us, to feed His Holy Spirit through us, then and only then can we bear fruit. Because we've all seen people who drift away from the church and they just kind of fade into the background. Their lives lose that wonderful meaning that they can have if they just abide there as that branch on the vine.
And if you are suffering right now, and I know it's easy for me to say it, but if you're suffering, it might actually be doing you some good in a way that isn't obvious, you know, right now. Sometimes you have to look back 5 or 10 years. You know, at some point you look back 5 or 10 years and you see that what you went through was good for you. Some of the things I went through to come in the church were kind of tough. And my wife, same thing. But it actually was good for us when you look back on it. So even if you're in some trials now, they could be a blessing in disguise.
Well, if you think about it, our goal being to be in the kingdom and to be transformed into a new spirit being, all this fleshly stuff that bothers us, ails us, we think is the end of the world, the beginning, will look as if it was nothing because of what we have received and what we have become. All this physical stuff will seem like, why did we waste our time worrying about it? But we don't have that knowledge of how wonderful that's going to be. Now, it's hard when you're in the flesh to see what you, and to feel what you have never actually seen or experienced. We just know it's there, but we haven't experienced it.
Well, I was looking also back in Ephesians 5, Dr. Rick, where you left off, and in verse 17, it also says, redeeming the time because the days are evil. Wherefore be you not unwise, but understanding what the will of the Lord is. And certainly God says we need, as His people, to study, to show ourselves approved, not being ashamed, you know, and rightly dividing the word of truth. So we have a responsibility, really, you know, a great responsibility to do just that. And there are people out there that want answers. You know, we look and we watch the news and we see all these protests going on, all these people that are so unhappy, no answers, but we have answers. And God has given us the understanding that they just absolutely, the best minds out there do not have the understanding that as we said right here, and those that are listening in, that have God's Spirit, we understand. And so we need to do exactly that. We're ambassadors for Christ, is what we are, getting ready for a great, great change, to change all this unhappiness that's out there, and to take control of the situation with Jesus Christ and rule this world. So we have a great responsibility. Yeah.
While further in that chapter, he mentions singing psalms in your heart. I think good Christian music can make you feel a little more loving, spiritual. I don't mean weird stuff. I know there's some. I guess music is a matter of taste. But some Christian rock is just rock with Christian words, and I don't think it gets. But you can decide for yourself what you like and don't like, because I know that's a complex. You know, I love it. You know what you like and don't like, but try to get good music in you. I was reading Philippians 2, and I want to just read this little section, Philippians 2:2, the next couple of verses. In Philippians, the 2nd chapter, verse 2, it reads, Fulfill you my joy, that you be like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord with one mind. So, try to be as unified as you can. Let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem the other better than themselves. Look not every man on his own things, but every man also on the things of others. Now, the word also means you can take care of your own things too. But can you see, isn't that a beautifully translated section of unselfishness? That's what Christ wants us to be, like him, unselfish, where you think of the other person as well as yourself, and you're not trying to do things to, what word am I thinking of? You're trying to outrighteous the other guy or outshine the other guy. Would you let me, Terry?
Yeah, I think so. It's over and over the Bible tells us about remaining humble, because really anything that we are, anything that we have, any talents or abilities that we possess, were gifts that were given to us by someone else, by our Heavenly Father. He created us for a specific purpose in the future. And, I think by and large, we really don't know what those purposes are specifically. We know it's going to have, we're going to be younger brothers and sisters of Jesus Christ. We're going to be somewhat senior members in the family. But, we really don't know what our specific job is going to be. But we will have the talents and abilities, and we will have had the trials and tests that prepare us for that. So it's really not us. We're really no different than anybody else. And even Paul said that, not many wise, not many noble, not many mighty are called. But God has chosen the base things of the world. Now that's pretty humbling when you think about it. Paul is telling us that we are just common, ordinary, run-of-the-mill folks. So we really don't have anything, quite frankly, to be proud about.
I was thinking about my experiences in the Worldwide Church of God. I don't know, one day, it was way back and I don't remember the exact year, it might have been 1970 or something. I realized that the local church was very, very competitive, and people were very competitive. And it kind of created a bad atmosphere in Worldwide. And people were jealous of each other. And I don't, some of you who were there back then may not even have noticed it, but it was there. A lot of jealousy and competition. And I actually think we may be a lot smaller, but I think we're more mature. You don't feel all that much. Everybody's got to outdo each other all the time and outshine each other. And it's whatever gifts you have, you do the best of what you've got, and then, don't worry about it. If anybody was in Worldwide, say 30, 40, 45 years ago, did any of you notice that overly competitive spirit? Yes, Trudy, why don't you hand the mic to her? Be sure that little green light is on. She's right there, and she can speak.
I didn't notice it being competitive, but I do recall for a long time feeling like I was definitely the most worthless person in church because people weren't overly friendly. They, really stuck together with their buddies that they were close to, and I just felt like I was really not worthy of being there for a long time. I mean, I was a human. I really wasn't all that good, but I felt worthless.
Yeah, there were cliques.
Yeah.
There were cliques.
And I guess what I'm saying is the church was big, but the qualitative, we had the quantity, but not the quality. There were people who were just, and even in Ambassador College, just a lot of pettiness. Now, there were some good things too, so I'm going to try to balance that out. There are a lot of good things there. And that's the opposite of what Paul is writing in Philippians 2. If we want to be in Christ, be more like Christ, be more serving, selfless, less jealousy, less pettiness. Yes. Greg?
Yeah, I know I find myself, it seems like a lot, saying a lot, God help me not to be stupid. to be like you in Jesus Christ. And they really have to call out to God, a lot, because we can't forget or call, like Paul said, there's that struggle, that battle to do good, and yet we find ourselves not doing it. But so it is a struggle.
Carl Hill, one of our main men.
I was thinking about, we've talked about trials, going through trials. I guess all of us have had a few, maybe some have had quite a few. Personally, I've had some trials, but I don't feel they've been terribly severe, and I'm not asking for severe trial. Some of the things that have happened in my life, I think back, and I didn't do as good as I could have or should have. But what I'm really thinking about is what's happening in other parts of the world, especially in the Middle East and North Africa. Christians there are facing trials that it just blows your mind. They're attacked and slaughtered. Their children killed right before their eyes, and just things that we really wouldn't want to talk about them to them. And I think of one woman that comes to my mind. I think she's now in America. She was, I think, from Sudan, and because she wouldn't renounce her Christianity, and I have no idea what her faith was, what denomination, she wouldn't renounce it, and she was in prison for that. A 2 or 3 year old son with her in prison, and she was pregnant, and they were threatening to kill the woman, beat her, hang her, everything else if she didn't renounce Christianity, and she didn't. And I think, are we going to have to go through trials like that? Will those trials come to us?
Do you remember her name?
I don't remember it, but
it's on the tip of my mind. Anybody remember her name?
She eventually came to America, and I guess she lives here now. But she was finally freed because enough pressure was put on that government to free her.
I believe actually Fox News might have saved her.
Fox News. She was on Fox.
They put her on Fox News. That created enough political pressure that some of this I'm guessing. Behind the scenes, probably the U.S. Embassy and maybe the Pope, PS, Ambassador Powers as well, put pressure on that country because I remember she said, her name's on the tip of my mind. She said that they told her she didn't really have to believe it. All she had to do was publicly, whatever the exact term is, you have to say, where you say that Allah is the
Shahada.
The Shahada, yeah.
You have to say there is one God, and it's Allah, and His messenger is Muhammad.
Yeah, why don't you give it to Michael so he can say it so the people who are watching us in faraway Mongolia can
Was
hear
her
the
name
exact word.
Miriam Ibrahim?
I believe that's it. Go ahead, Michael.
It's very easy to convert to Islam. You only have to repeat the first tenet of Islam. I can say it in Arabic if you want, but I won't.
Okay.
But it's essentially that there is one God, it's Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet.
Yeah.
And once you do that, once you publicly say that, then you're considered Muslim.
Yeah. All she had to do was say that in public, kind of imply that she's no longer a Christian. They would release her. Otherwise, she was going to get, I think, 100 lashes. 100 lashes for a woman in that condition is probably a death sentence. And yet she held firm. And that was kind of amazing. Her name was Miriam Ali. Miriam, I think that was it. By the way, if you want to find a shocker, her name is on the Southern Poverty Law Center name of hateful people.
So is Chick-fil-A.
Then you're gonna say, how could a woman who did a heroic thing like that be on the Southern Poverty Leadership hate list of haters? Because in America, the far left and Islam have made a political alliance. And I know you're going to say, well, they don't agree on a lot of things. How's that possible? Now, this is my opinion, but I believe it to be true, and I've seen many signs of it. They both have a common enemy. The common enemy is what we call traditional Christian America. You can maybe redefine that different ways, but If the far left wants to turn this into a socialist, more or less godless, or you don't take your religion too seriously country. And Islam, of course, wants to replace Christianity. So they both see traditional American Christian values as the enemy. Now, both sides think once they do, those of us that we could put in that category in, then they'll get rid of the other one. You know, they both kind of think that. But that's an alliance. And because she's critical of Islam, that puts her on the hater list.
Both sides hate Western civilization. That's their bond. Both sides. That's so yeah, like just like you said, each one thinks they'll be in charge, and little do they know.
Just to throw a little politics in, I know gun control is big. I don't have all the answers on gun control, you know, and maybe they can get rid of the bump stock, but you realize that I think they have a ton of laws against machine guns, but it's complicated. Some of these things have been invented since the law was written, so they are not included as excluded items, and that's going to always be a problem. But maybe they can get around it somehow. But here's what socialist countries do. When Adolf Hitler took power in Germany, he took the guns away from the people. When Mussolini took power, I'm pretty sure he did the exact same thing. When, what's the guy in Venezuela? I keep thinking of his name. Chavez took over Hugo. He took the guns away from the people. And in Venezuela's case, it's proved to be a very I mean, it was true in Hitler's case too, but it's very substantial. Later, when people were rioting because food was shortages, people would loot grocery stores because there wasn't enough food and not enough toilet paper. Give that some thought. Anyway, but people are really suffering over it, and they're upset. Well, but they're totally unarmed. And when the riots come, he gave guns only to the rioters who are on his side, which means the other side gets easily massacred. In the case of the Gestapo in Germany, once the German people were disarmed, and you know how the Gestapo works, you know, and they had people spying on each other, you almost had to feel sorry for a German person who saw what was happening in Germany and didn't like it. You say too much, you are totally easy victims of Gestapo. I'm just saying, you see the problem. And as I say, I don't have all the answers on gun crime. As one lady said, are we going to have less guns and more madmen? That's the problem. You know, the madmen are going to do mad stuff, regardless of the gun laws. But the founding fathers of America, I think they somehow sensed that a government that rules over vulnerable, totally unarmed public is going to be more dictatorial, less respect for the rights of the people. They knew that, and I'm not saying that was the only reason for the Second Amendment. There were other reasons, militia reasons, and things that helped, you know, on the frontier and all that frontier bravery stuff. But I do think the founding fathers understood that. The public doesn't understand it because they don't teach American history in public schools. They don't teach the Bible either, which, by the way, they used to teach the Bible, and it was allowed in public schools. Most people won't even believe that, but that's true. Even Thomas Jefferson had the Bible as one of the textbooks in the Washington, D.C. school district when he was president, 1804. I mean, you know, but he put that in the Constitution about separation of church and state. They miss it. By the way, if you read his Danbury letter, it was to protect the church from the state, not the state from the church. They never show you his original letter. He was protecting the Baptists because at the time they were a minority religion being picked on by the government and the bigger religions, which had more government contact. He wasn't protecting the government from morality. Jefferson and Washington and Franklin and Adams, those guys be turning in their graves if they see the way their words are being interpreted.
Anybody else?
No, nothing to add.
Here's a comment right here.
Dr. Ricky, earlier, how about for us, when you think your deed is distraction, your message.
Oh, other D.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, distraction. I forgot that. That's how I'm distracted.
Is one of the things that's going on in society now, it's like for us, several journalists talk about poverty in different places and everything. And people live. So we're so rich, we got this idea of freedom of speech. You're free to say anything you want, but the thing is out there, it seems to be trying to shut us up.
Yep.
You know, for us, when people get out of shape because of a prayer at a graduation, prayer at a football game, and people, one person said, I feel excluded. That person up there is asking God to bless you in spite of yourself. Stuff like
They don't like that.
It's out there is to shut us up. And you mentioned earlier for it, people knows God's word. They'll let this stuff out here kind of do what's going into a corner and everything. It's out there. Because in our state, Arkansas, there's a justice when gay marriage is hot heavy and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So on TV, forming this union. This guy also will be a clergyman himself. You know, he's a minister of God. He's doing this. That's weird. If they come out there more and more, we will be in trouble. The thing for us to do is not to be cowed by anybody.
No. And what he said earlier was about the gun control. If they can get our guns, they can get our Bibles eventually. If they can get our free speech, they can shut us down as a church. In Canada, there's certain verses you can't preach from the pulpit in Canada, right across the line. I live 40 miles, 50 miles from the Canada line. If I was to go over there at a church and preach out of the Bible the wrong verses, I could be put in jail. Yeah. And they don't like that. But once they get these things, we're next. Gay marriage, you talked about that. Years ago, gay unions were perfectly fine with them. Just a civil union, you got to share your hospitalization, you got to share your inheritances. It was on paper, it was pretty much a marriage, but it wasn't called marriage. Calling it marriage gets their foot in the door of the church, gives them access to the church, and gives them access to start tearing apart at the church. That's why they wanted it so bad. They're doing these things to slowly whittle. Well, we're kind of getting away of remaining in Christ to subject, but they're doing this to whittle away at the church. It's all designed to come at Christians. That's nominal Christians now, because they're going after Christmas and Easter and all that. We'll be next once they cave. Once they see there's a hardened group out here that's not going along with all this and don't cave to their the gay marriage or the all the other subjects that we talk. We won't cave to our holy days. We won't cave to the Sabbath. Once they get them, we'll be next. We know that is spoken of in the Bible. And these are the little things they're doing to chisel at. They chiseled real light years ago when I was young. Now they're taking chunks, they're dynamiting their way into get to the church and then eventually get to the core of the church. True Christians. And they're using all these little tactics to do it.
The Bible is verboten in most colleges now. A lot of public schools as well.
What's that college that they banned the Bible in the church? I mean, the church in the college. You cannot have a Bible in the church. And they made them take, which is fine with us, they made them take the crucifix down. But that's the thing. They get that, then they come after more and more and more. Eventually, the church is mowed down and they put up a mosque or something.
I think it was in Iowa, but I may not be sure. But somewhere in the Midwest, or it could be Oklahoma, one of those two. There's a public college that when they built it many years ago, they built a church there because most people are Christians. They have services. Well, they say, well, wait a minute, that's on public property. You can't have Bibles and crosses and any religious symbol on public property. I mean, that's not how the public felt 60 years ago, but I'm telling you, that's what they're now pushing, and apparently they got away with it. They're also saying the Bible is toxic. Like poison, toxic. You've heard some of the academics say that, some of the celebrities say that. I actually think they believe it, or they want you to believe it.
Yes, absolutely. And the only way we're going to be able to survive that is tonight's topic is to remain in Christ. If we let the world pull at us and guilt us and fade our judgment and try to convince us this language is wrong or this thought is wrong or let's give them an inch, they never take an inch. They beg for an inch and they take a foot and they just keep taking and taking. I've seen it in my lifetime. Some of you lived a lot longer than me, have seen a lot more in your lifetime. It's not going the other way. Maybe we got to pause for a few years, but maybe not. They seem to be fighting harder and more vicious and with more veracity now for their goals because they see that they might be slipping away from all the work they've done in the last 60, 70 years is slipping a little bit, and they're not having any of it. So we're seeing more this Antifa and all this vicious hate and anger that's dividing this nation, people beating hitting each other with bike locks on chains over things. And we have to stay in Christ, know who we are, not get our heads involved in this, and be ready when we're called to step up and show witness and explain what our Father has shown to us.
Gary has a comment, and then I think Mr. King has a comment also.
Getting back to remaining in Christ and teenage suicide. Recently in May, a young man committed suicide, and I knew he said I did more for him than his own physical father and stepfather combined. And he'd been in jail, and he'd written some letters about how he wanted to be a better father to his 3 children. He wanted to straighten out, get off the drugs and everything. Well, he slashed his wrist, overdosed on meth, and hung himself.
Wow.
This was in May. So I recently attended a seminar on teenage suicide. And what teenagers don't have, they don't have the fatty tissue in their brain that adults have, which helps them to see beyond the problem that they are in. All they can see is the pain that they are in right now, and they want to get rid of that pain. They don't have the faith in Christ or in Christ. They don't have the hope. They don't have this hope beyond their pain on that day. They don't have the hope of being in the kingdom of God. They don't have the hope of being in the family of God. They don't have that hope that a lot of our children in the church have and that we have. And that's one of the main reasons that they do commit suicide. Some of the young, teenagers among them, they don't have that fatty tissue in the brain where they can look beyond today and the pain of today and have the hope of the kingdom of God and the family of God, being the sons and children of God.
A lot of modern parents believe it's wrong to give their children any kind of religious teaching, so they are spiritually empty and void.
Commenting on what he said about the Bible being toxic. Last year, when the nominees were running for president, I saw on TV Hillary Clinton addressing a bunch of Wall Street people. And it really surprised me what she said. She said, the greatest danger to America today is Christianity. Now, I couldn't believe that when I heard that.
That is kind of hard to believe, isn't it? For a major political candidate to say the greatest danger to America is Christianity.
But he said it was Clinton. It's real easy to believe. I'm sorry. Yeah, remember the last convention? They took God, they booed God.
Oh, by the way, I remember in 2012, the Democrats booed God, but the networks didn't cover that. Only Fox did. If you didn't see Fox, and then the mayor of LA, he still put God on their platform because they knew they needed some votes from Christians. but they did boo God. But they tried to. It was an emotional outlet. They didn't want the American public to know that's how they felt. It is kind of scary, though, isn't it? A major political party. I mean, the idea of booing God, wouldn't that scare the out of you?
Us, they don't believe in him, so it doesn't. And I don't know, you know, they took it out of the Democratic platform then, but I don't know if the Republicans are far off. If they thought they could get something out of it, I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, all I can say is I do sense, Kim's talking about the anger. I do sense that the far left, the election was a big loss because they had things really going their way. I mean, they're still, you know, trying to undermine Trump and keep things going their way. But what you sense is an anger. Antifa maybe is the physical expression of it, but there's an anger against America moving somewhat, and I say somewhat, not in a traditional pro-God direction. And the left and the media, you can almost watch CNN and sense their anger, can't you? I can't watch too much of CNN anymore. I guess it depends on who you like, but you know, I sense you can. The anger is almost palpable.
I mean, it's evidently, for a lot of people, it's become a propaganda machine for the left. And I used to go through the channel, but I have to confess now I don't. It's because it's depressing. And so I do watch Fox News, but I've cut out the rest of it because it seems like that now it's just one lie after another.
For instance, now I really didn't watch too much of these shows, but every now and then I might watch a Tony Award or the when they give out the movie awards. I forgot all the titles. They have a bunch of them. But you can't watch those shows now. They take so many, well, not always, but many times they take so many low shots at us stupid Christians that it's irritating. And you just get tired of watching it. Yes, Carl.
There is one, maybe two channels that you can get a lot more objective news even than Fox, I think. And, we're on satellite direct, and we get what they call OAN, One American News. It's kind of new, and it reminds me of the way CNN was when it started and the way Fox was when it started. They're pretty objective. I don't expect they'll stay objective over the years, but they're a lot more objective now. And also we get a news service out of China of all things, and they give more objective news. They have a certain slant, and you know what it is, but you will see things all around the world that you don't see on our news. Mostly we see political stuff, you know, scandal, and when a shooting happens, things like that, but they actually show news. But the OAN to me is the best American network right now. And I don't know if anybody is familiar with it, but I don't know.
Can you get I'm put the initials so I can remember, OAN. We haven't been able to find it on
Dish.
On we have the other, yeah. Which one do we have on Dish? We have OAN on Dish. We're not on DirecTV. It is on Dish. Okay, my wife said it's there.
She's got it.
She's found it. OAN's on Dish. Try to find it. It's on YouTube. OAN.
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it yet.
Also, AFR, American Family Radio. Not every show. Some are just music. But they have some very good, they're very, very conservative Christian perspective, but they have some very good analysis that you would not hear hardly any other place. Usually they're on the low FM dial, like 89.3, where we are, 89.1. 88.5. Look on your FM dial. I'm saying this to the audience that's seeing us on the podcast too. You'll find AFR gives you much better news, and from a Christian perspective. And, you know, there may be a few things we would disagree with, but not enough that it's problematic. And like Sandy Rios, she puts her heart in her news analysis, but you feel it when you hear her in the morning. And what's the other lady's name that's very good also? Janet Medford. Yeah, and then there's some men on there that are very good. I just can't think of their names at the moment. Tony Perkins. Tony Perkins is really good. Tony Perkins. And you're going to learn a lot more from them than all those clowns on NBC. Oh, it says where my bias is.
I must confess, I haven't paid for cable. I haven't had cable in 20 years. I come to the hotel, I'm going, now I know why I don't pay for cable. There's nothing to watch.
The cable news is not the exception. Most of it is, they've got to the tabloid level.
Yeah.
The tabloid level. They really have. And sometimes they throw a tabloid thing in there. Well, the president's going to look good this week. Let's throw a tabloid story in there to smear him. I mean, they do that. You see it. You know how they think. You see them doing it. So we are in a tabloid propaganda, anti-Bible world. And they're going to make you ashamed to believe in the Bible. I do see that coming. Some of you are shaking your head. It's coming. They want to make you ashamed of believing in the Bible.
A lot of people already are.
What?
I said a lot of people already are. I'm just saying a lot of people already are. If you bring up even, out in a workplace, you can see that people get uncomfortable if you bring up God or the Bible. It's pretty common to see that.
And they look at you like,
yeah, they look right. Yeah,
right, what are you?
In most workplaces, you just can't. You do, you don't have a job,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is bad. I got to admit it. And even when I was in some of the committee meetings, I got in trouble. Even though you don't say Bible, but when you discuss things with people, they somehow can sense that you have more conservative Bible, pro-family thinking patterns, and they, especially in academia, they dislike it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's true. My world, I guess, is a little different because I'm being in construction. I talk to a lot of construction workers, and they tend to be rather conservative. And I've learned to kind of keep my mouth shut until I kind of figure out which way a person is leaning. And more and more, the average ordinary person is expressing increasingly conservative views and very much anti-Clinton and other folks like that. So it's, and we see that in prophecy, that things are going to become tougher and tougher. You can read that it's going to be tougher and tougher to become a Christian. And several years ago, I was attending the feast in Tahoe, and I got to know Chris Cumming fairly well. And Chris told me, he said, I just made up my mind because of the position that he's in, the rather public position of handling the website and that sort of thing. He said, I realize that the odds are pretty good that when things get really, really bad, I might actually be martyred over that. And he said, it took me a while to kind of get my head around that, but he said, once I realized that was a real possibility, then you kind of adjust to it. And he said, everything else just kind of falls in place and you just sort of quit worrying about it. And, we have those promises that Christ says, I'll not test you above what you can bear. And so, when we see things deteriorating the way that they obviously are, at least in our nation, and of course over the years, many people will acknowledge that the only reason that the world is not speaking German or Japanese or Chinese or something like that is because the United States was this powerful nation that kept everything under control. We defeated the dictators, World War I, World War II. You can look at any of those, and it's like oh, I can't remember the quote, when Charles de Gaulle was trying to run he said he ordered the American military completely out of France. And I can't remember the general who it was, asked him, he says, does that include all the dead that are buried here liberating France? And he said, you could have heard a pin drop, so. But America has had that role over the years. And it's just heartbreaking to see what's happening. The whole thing that we're all talking about here is the deterioration of those values that made America as President Reagan called it, that shining city on a hill. And it's saddening to see that. But once you realize it's going to happen and that times are going to be tough, and each one of us in here may very well live through that, we can, you will eventually adjust to it, and it becomes not nearly the threat that it is otherwise. And that's the way Chris Cumming felt. He said, it doesn't bother me anymore when I read about Christians being martyred in the future and that sort of thing. He said, I've already adjusted that that's probably going to happen to me. Whether it does or not, who knows? But, once it is just that exhibition of faith, I think, that God says, I'm not going to test you beyond what you can bear. And at this point, we probably don't even know what that is, how far we can be tested.
And, people should appreciate Ronald Reagan for winning the Cold War. He got tough with the Soviet Union and called that the evil empire, which it was. I mean, clearly communism was an evil empire. By the way, there's, you look at things like the Vietnam War, really it wasn't a waste. I'm not saying they handled it well. Everybody knows they handled it poorly. But, and maybe you could say the same thing to some extent about the Korean War and some of the more smaller confrontations, but we did hold back the communist empire until it collapsed because it couldn't compete with America. And we saved hundreds of millions of people. And the only place that's pure communism left in the world is North Korea. The only Stalinist state that didn't switch over. Even China switched to capitalism. And, even Vietnam has switched to capitalism. All of them realized this communism stuff doesn't work. But North Korea never did. And they still have gulags. They don't call them that. They have different names, but it's the same principle. But people didn't really appreciate Reagan. In retrospect, I think we can. But there's one more. I heard Rush Limbaugh make this statement. And he related to the NFL, and we could debate that if it's true or not. He said, there are more Americans with traditional values in this country than we think. Now, the leadership, that is academia, the legal profession, Hollywood, TV, the media, comedians, all the leaders are pulling us away from the Bible, away from God. But he says he still, and by the way, a lot of, I call them left-wing Christian pastors, don't fully believe in the Bible either. That's another story you don't hear much about. But those forces are all pulling us to the left, away from God. But Rush Limbaugh says there still is a large number, like maybe 44, 45, 46% of the American public that still believes in traditional values, patriotism, the flag, and the Bible. How many of you think Rush Limbaugh may be right, and that's why the left and Islam are joining together, because that's why they're mad. They have not turned this country totally around yet.
I think he's right, but I think the demographics are working against most of those older people.
Would you hand that phone to Carl? I want the audience and the podcast to hear what Carl just said.
Yeah, I think he's right, but the demographics are working against us. Most of the ones he's talking about are probably older, and the leftists are set up where they can influence the children, whether it be entertainment or schools or video games or the internet. That's where we're losing the battle, is in the younger people.
Where would you say the cutoff was? 45 and under?
Probably something like that.
Well, it's interesting that this came up because they now know, psychologists and psychiatrists know that young people don't have, it's kind of like what Gary was talking about, that I didn't realize it was the fatty material in the brain. But up to a certain point, young people don't make the connection between cause and effect. And when you think about it, that's, we have 18-year-olds voting. And so they really don't understand the consequences of their vote. But it's the same kind of thing, that it's usually, they know that it's between the ages of about 23 or 4 up to around the late 20s that all of a sudden young people get that connection between, okay, what I do has consequences. And it's often, the thing that often leads that is debt. It's so easy for young college students to get in debt because these credit card companies just send them credit cards. Usually has a low limit on it, but it's not until they make that connection. You know, there's an old saying that if you're under 30 and you're not a Democrat, you don't have any heart. And if you're over 30 and not a Republican, you don't have any brains. And that's where that all comes from, is at some point, most people make that connection between cause and effect. Now, and I also think there's a group of people that never makes that connection. For instance, the people that are perpetually in jail, you know, you wonder, do these people not understand what it is that keeps putting them back in jail? So you were talking about the demographics. Those people who are so liberal now that are rioting on campuses and things like that will one day probably be very conservative. At least that's my hope.
One thing that's helped in the past and doesn't help as much now is when you begin to have children. And fewer people are having children now, the young people not even getting married. But when you begin to have children, your outlook changes. And I'll guarantee you it really changes when you have grandchildren.
Yeah, that is really true. And by the way, the average age for marriage is close to 30. Wow. Close to 30. And the radical feminists are teaching young women that having children is evil and bad. You know, you think about the craziness of some of these things. I mean, if you don't want to have kids for other reasons, that's fine. By the way, and I'll apologize, I mentioned in some program that a lot of the vegetarians are radical earth worshipers, which is true. But I should make the statement, many people are vegetarians for many other reasons, like they love animals, for their own particular diet purposes and other good purposes too. So I'm not lumping all vegetarians in with the earth worshipers. And if it sounded that way, that's just because I run my mouth off too much. So that you don't have the chance to qualify what you just said. Well, I want to thank all of you for coming out. I enjoyed the session, and I hope the people who get to hear this on the podcast will enjoy your thoughts. They've gone out to the far ends of the earth.
All right. Well, we want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and we're going to sign off for tonight. And we hope to see everybody back here next week. And with one
We're happy you could make it. So glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear.
No, that is not me.
Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.
I enjoyed the discussion.